For 36 years, I was the daughter who never asked for anything. I paid my own way through college, bought my own car, built my own career. And when my parents needed help, a new roof, medical bills, my sister's credit card debt, I quietly wrote the checks. No one ever thanked me. No one even knew. So when I walked into my parents' house that night with my fiancé Evan, expecting to finally discuss my wedding, I thought maybe, just maybe it was my turn. I was wrong. "We gave your wedding fund to your sister," my father announced, chest puffed with pride. "She deserves a real wedding." Lily smirked from across the table. My mother nodded like this was perfectly reasonable. $40,000 gone, just like that. I felt my face burn, my throat tightened. I couldn't speak, but Evan could. He stood up slowly, pulled out his phone and said 5 words that made my sister's smile vanish. Should I tell them what I do for a living? What happened next changed everything. My name is Hayley Fleming. I'm 36 years old and I work as a senior financial analyst at one of the largest investment firms in the country. I manage portfolios worth millions. I own my own home and I built my entire life from nothing without a single dollar of help from my family. The night everything changed started like any other visit to my parents' house. Evan and I pulled into the driveway just after 6, the late spring sun casting long shadows across the lawn my father had always been so proud of. I remember smoothing down my blouse, taking a breath and telling myself that tonight would be different. Tonight, we were here to talk about my wedding. For once, the conversation would be about me. I should have known better. The moment I walked through the front door, I felt that strange, nervous energy crackling beneath the surface. My mother hugged me a beat too quickly. My father shook Evan's hand without quite meeting his eyes. And there, already seated in the living room, like royalty holding court, was my younger sister Lily. She was radiant as always. Blonde hair, perfectly styled designer handbag, resting beside her on the couch, her fiancé Derek sitting quietly at her side. The moment she saw me, she launched into an animated description of her wedding plans, a 200-guest celebration at the Grandview estate, a custom gown from some designer I'd never heard of, a honeymoon in the Maldives. My parents listened with glowing faces, nodding along their eyes, bright with pride. Lily didn't have a job. She'd never held one for more than 6 months. Derek worked in mid-level sales and drove a 10-year-old Honda. I had no idea how they planned to afford any of this. But I said nothing. I'd learned a long time ago that asking questions about Lily's choices only made me the difficult one. Instead, I sat on the love seat. Across from them, Evan's warm hand finding mine, and I let my mind drift to the pattern I knew so well. Growing up, I was always the one who had to share, to sacrifice, to understand. When Lily wanted my bedroom, I moved to the smaller one without complaint. When Lily needed help with tuition, my parents used the money they'd saved for my study abroad trip. When I graduated with honours, they forgot to come to the ceremony, but they threw Lily a party when she finally finished college 2 years late. I became the responsible one, the strong one, the one who didn't need anything. And somewhere along the way, I stopped telling them about my life. They didn't know about my promotions, my salary, the condo I'd purchased on my own. To them, I was just Hayley the daughter, with some vague office job who always figured things out. Tonight, I wanted to believe things could be different. When the conversation finally paused, I took a breath and said, "So I was hoping we could talk about my wedding. You know, the fund you promised when I turned 25. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's smile flickered. She glanced at my father, then down at her hands. "Oh well, we can talk about that later, honey. Lily was just telling us about her venue deposit." I felt Evan stiffen beside me. Across the room, Derek shifted uncomfortably. He leaned toward Lily and murmured, "Are you sure your parents can afford all this?" Lily waved him off with a flick of her wrist. "Don't worry, babe. It's handled." Something cold settled in my stomach. I watched my parents exchange another look, guilty, evasive, and I knew with a certainty that made my chest ache that something was very wrong. My father cleared his throat. He set down his glass, folded his hands, and finally looked at me. "Hayley," he said slowly, "there's something we need to tell you about your wedding fund." My father's words hung in the air, and I felt my body tense as I waited. Part of me already knew what was coming. I had felt it the moment I walked through the door, in the way my parents avoided looking at me, in the nervous energy that filled the room. But nothing could have prepared me for the calm, matter-of-fact way my mother delivered the blow. She straightened her posture, folded her hands in her lap, and spoke as if she were discussing what to have for dinner. "We gave your wedding fund to Lily," she said. "Her wedding is bigger, and she needs it more. We knew you would understand." I stared at her, waiting for the rest of the explanation, the apology, the acknowledgement that this was a difficult decision. But none came. She simply looked at me with that patient, expectant expression she always wore when she wanted me to fall in line. My father nodded beside her, adding his own justification as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "You have always been the strong one, Hayley. You will figure it out. You always do." $40,000, the money they had promised me when I turned 25, the money I had been counting on not because I needed it, but because it represented something. It was supposed to be proof that they saw me, that they valued me, that I mattered just as much as my sister. And they had given it away without even asking. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy with a weight I could not name. Across the room, Lily shifted in her seat, and I saw it, the smile. It was not quite triumphant, not openly gloating, but satisfied in a way that made my stomach turn. She tilted her head slightly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I told them you would not mind," she said. "You are not really the fancy wedding type anyway, right? You have always been so practical. I figured you would rather have something small and simple, intimate." The word landed like a slap. Intimate. As if my worth could be measured in guest counts and venue sizes. As if wanting a beautiful wedding made someone shallow, but wanting someone else's money to pay for it was perfectly acceptable. I looked at her, at the self-satisfied curve of her lips, and I realised something that should have been obvious years ago. This was not about the money. It never had been. This was about how they saw me. To my parents, I was not the successful daughter who had built a career through hard work and determination. I was not the woman who had quietly supported this family for years without asking for recognition. I was the responsible one, the one who did not need things, the one who could always be counted on to step aside, to sacrifice, to understand. My strength had become a weapon they used against me. Because I never complained, they assumed I never hurt. Because I always figured things out, they stopped offering help. Because I had spent 36 years being the easy daughter, the low-maintenance daughter, the daughter who never caused problems, they had decided I did not deserve the same consideration as my sister. My silence was not virtue. It was a trap I had built around myself, and they had been more than happy to leave me there. Evan's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. I could feel the tension radiating from him, the barely contained anger he was fighting to control. He had seen glimpses of this dynamic over the years, but never anything this blatant. Never anything this cruel. I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But inside, something was cracking. Something that had been holding me together for a very long time. Derek's voice cut through the silence. He looked uncomfortable, confused, like a man who had wandered into someone else's argument and did not know how to leave. "Wait," he said, turning to Lily. "Did you ask Hayley first, before your parents made this decision?" Lily waved her hand dismissively, not even bothering to look at him. "She does not care about these things. Trust me. Hayley has never been sentimental about stuff like this." I watched Derek's face as she spoke. He did not argue, but something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, maybe. Or the first crack in whatever image Lily had carefully constructed for him. He glanced at me just for a moment, and I saw him filing this information away. Remembering it, I wanted to say something. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I did care, that I had always cared, that the only reason I had stopped showing it was because no one ever noticed anyway. But before I could find the words, Lily leaned forward, her smile widening. "Besides," she said, her tone casual, almost bored, "it is not like you really need it. You and Evan are doing fine. You can just have a little backyard thing. Save the big celebrations for people who actually appreciate them." The room went silent. Even my parents seemed to sense that she had gone too far. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father looked down at his hands. But Lily just sat there, perfectly composed, as if she had not just reduced my entire wedding, my entire relationship, my entire worth to something that did not matter. I felt Evan stiffen beside me. His hand released mine and I heard him take a slow, deliberate breath. Then he stood up. My heart pounded as I watched him reach into his pocket and pull out his phone. His voice was calm, almost pleasant, but there was an edge beneath it that I had never heard before. "Should I tell them what I do for a living?" he asked. Lily's smile vanished, but only for a moment. I saw the flicker of uncertainty cross her face, the brief widening of her eyes as she tried to understand what Evan meant. But she recovered quickly, the way she always did, smoothing her expression into something dismissive and unconcerned. She let out a small laugh, the kind meant to make someone else feel foolish. "What does that have to do with anything?" she asked, glancing at our parents as if inviting them to join her in finding the whole thing ridiculous. My mother shifted uncomfortably and my father cleared his throat, clearly eager to move past the tension. I placed my hand on Evan's arm, a silent request. "Not yet. Not like this." He looked at me, his jaw tight, but he sat back down. The moment passed, but the air in the room remained heavy with something unspoken. Lily, sensing she had regained control, leaned back in her seat and shrugged. "Besides," she said casually, "your wedding is later anyway. Maybe by then Mum and Dad can save up again. It is not like this is the end of the world." She said it so easily, as if my wedding fund was something that could simply be rescheduled, like a dentist appointment or a haircut. As if my plans, my future, my hopes were always meant to come second, as if that was simply the natural order of things. I stared at her, and suddenly I was not sitting in my parents' living room anymore. I was 18 years old, standing in the kitchen of my childhood home, listening to my mother explain why they needed to use my scholarship money. Lily had gotten herself into credit card debt, thousands of dollars spent on clothes and trips and things she did not need, and my parents had decided the responsible thing to do was to bail her out. "You can take out loans," my mother had said. "You are smart. You will pay them off eventually, but Lily needs help now." I took out the loans. I spent the next 10 years paying them off, while Lily never faced a single consequence for her choices. I was 25, standing in the driveway, looking at the used Honda I had saved for 2 years to buy. I was proud of that car. It represented everything I had worked for, every extra shift, every skipped vacation, every sacrifice. 6 months later, I came home for Christmas and found a brand new sedan in my parents' driveway, a giant red bow on the hood. A graduation gift for Lily, who had taken 6 years to finish a 4-year degree. She needed something reliable, my father had said. "You understand?" I understood. I always understood. I was 28, sitting at my desk at work, staring at the email confirming my promotion to senior analyst. It was the biggest achievement of my career, the culmination of years of late nights and hard work, and proving myself in a field dominated by people who looked nothing like me. I called my mother that night, excited to share the news. "That is nice, honey," she had said, her voice distracted. "Did you hear Lily got a new boyfriend? He is a lawyer. We are so excited for her." I stopped sharing after that. I stopped expecting them to care about my life, my achievements, my happiness. I built my success in silence, telling myself it did not matter whether they noticed. But sitting here now listening to Lily dismiss my wedding as an afterthought, I realised how much it still hurt. How much it had always hurt. My father must have sensed the shift in the room because he leaned forward, with that placating expression he always wore when he wanted to smooth things over. "Hayley, you have to understand," he said gently. "Lily had that accident when she was little. We have always felt like we needed to make it up to her." The accident? I almost laughed. Lily fell off her bike when she was 8 years old. She broke her arm, wore a cast for 6 weeks, and healed completely. There were no lasting effects, no trauma, no permanent damage. But somehow, that one incident had become the foundation of 30 years of favoritism. Every time I questioned why Lily got more, why Lily was treated differently, why, where Lily's needs always came first, my parents brought up the accident. As if a broken arm at 8 years old entitled her to a lifetime of special treatment. As if my own struggles, my own pain, my own needs simply did not count. I looked at my mother, and that was when I noticed it. The necklace. A delicate silver chain with a small pendant, the one I had given her for her birthday 2 years ago. She had opened the box, glanced at it briefly, and said, "Oh, that is nice, but it is not really my style." I had not seen her wear it once since then. But tonight, there it was resting against her collarbone like it had always belonged there. I knew why. Lily must have complimented it recently, and suddenly it was worth wearing. Even my gifts only mattered when Lily approved of them. Something cold settled in my chest. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to earn their attention, their approval, their love. I thought about every sacrifice I had made, every time I had stepped aside, every moment I had convinced myself that being the responsible daughter was enough. It was never enough. It would never be enough. I took a slow breath and looked directly at my mother. My voice was quiet, steady, but something in it made the room go still. "What about the promise you made me?" I asked. 10 years ago, you looked me in the eye and promised that money would be there for my wedding. You gave me your word." My mother blinked, and for a moment I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe, or discomfort at being reminded of a commitment she had hoped I would forget. Then she straightened her shoulders and gave me a tight, patient smile. "Promises change, Hayley. Families help the child who needs it most. You have never needed us." My chest tightened, and I felt something inside me begin to crack. I stared at my mother, searching her face for any sign of regret, any flicker of awareness that she had just shattered something between us. But there was nothing. She looked at me with that same patient, slightly tired expression she always wore when she thought I was being difficult. As if my pain was an inconvenience. As if my feelings were a problem she wished would simply go away. My father leaned forward, placing his hand on my mother's arm in a gesture of solidarity. "One day, when you have children, you will understand," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Being a parent means making hard choices. You do what is best for the family, even when it is not easy." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask them when they had ever made a hard choice for me. When had they ever sacrificed anything for my benefit? When had they ever looked at me and decided that I deserved something that I was worth protecting, that my needs mattered just as much as my sister's? But I did not scream. I did not say any of those things. I sat there in silence, my hands trembling slightly in my lap, feeling 36 years of suppressed pain pressing against my chest like a physical weight. This was what they truly believed. They were not being cruel on purpose. They genuinely thought this was fair. They had convinced themselves that because I was capable, because I was responsible, because I had never fallen apart in front of them, I did not need their love in the same way Lily did. My strength had become my punishment. Lily must have sensed that the battle was won because she relaxed back into her seat with a small, satisfied smile. She tilted her head, looking at me with what she probably thought was sympathy, but was really something much colder. "Honestly," she said, her voice light and casual, "a backyard wedding would be perfect for you. Simple, intimate, very you." She said the words as if she were doing me a favour, as if she were helping me see the bright side of being robbed. But I heard what she really meant. A backyard wedding was all I deserved. A backyard wedding was all I was worth. She was not just taking my money. She was telling me in front of everyone that I did not matter enough to have what she had. That my wedding, my relationship, my happiness were always meant to be smaller, lesser, less important. I felt Evan's hand tighten around mine under the table. I could sense the anger radiating from him, the effort it was taking him to stay silent. He had been so patient, so supportive, letting me navigate my family in my own way. But I knew he had reached his limit. I had reached mine too. Before I could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Derek!" He had been sitting quietly beside Lily for most of the evening, looking increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation unfolded. Now he leaned forward, his brow furrowed, his expression confused. "Wait," he said slowly. "How much was in that fund?" The question hung in the air. My mother glanced at my father, then back at Derek. $40,000, she said. We had been saving it for years. Derek's face changed. It was subtle at first, just a slight tightening around his eyes, a stiffness in his jaw. Then he turned to Lily, and I saw something I had never seen before in his expression. Suspicion. "You told me your parents were covering everything as a gift," he said, his voice careful and measured. "You said there was no fund. You said they were paying for the wedding because they wanted to, not because they were taking money from anyone else." Lily's composure cracked for just a moment. I saw the flash of panic in her eyes, the quick calculation as she tried to figure out how to spin this. Then she forced a smile, reaching out to touch Derek's arm. "It is complicated, babe," she said lightly. "Family finances are always messy. The important thing is that everything is taken care of now." But Derek did not look reassured. He pulled his arm back slightly, almost imperceptibly, and I saw him file this moment away. He was not going to forget. He was not going to let it go. For the first time all evening, I felt something other than pain. I felt a small, grim satisfaction watching Lily scramble to control a situation that was slipping away from her. She had built her entire relationship with Derek on a foundation of half-truths and careful omissions, and now the cracks were starting to show. Evan squeezed my hand again, and this time he did not let go. I felt him shift beside me, saw him reach into his pocket with his free hand. He was pulling out his phone. My heart began to pound. I knew what he was thinking. I knew what he wanted to do. Part of me wanted to stop him to preserve whatever was left of the fragile peace in this room. But another part of me, the part that had been silent for 36 years, wanted to let him speak. I wanted someone to finally tell the truth about who I really was, about what I had really done for this family, about the years of sacrifice and support that no one in this room knew about. Evan stood up slowly, his movements calm and deliberate. Every eye in the room turned to him. My parents looked confused. Lily looked wary. Derek looked curious. I held my breath. "I think," Evan said, his voice steady and pleasant, but with an edge beneath it that made the room go still. "There is some information missing from this conversation." Every eye in the room was fixed on Evan. My parents looked bewildered, unsure what he could possibly have to say. Lily's expression had hardened into something defensive, her earlier smugness replaced by wariness. Derek sat motionless, watching the scene unfold with the detached curiosity of someone who was beginning to realize he did not know the full story. And Evan stood there, phone in hand, waiting for my permission. I caught his eye and shook my head. It was a small movement, barely noticeable to anyone else, but he understood immediately. He paused, his jaw tightening with frustration, but he did not continue. Instead, he slowly lowered his phone and sat back down beside me. I could feel his tension, the effort it took him to hold back. He wanted to defend me. He wanted to expose every lie, every injustice, every hidden truth that my family had never bothered to learn, but I was not ready. 36 years of conditioning do not disappear in a single night. Even now, after everything that had been said, some part of me still clung to the hope that this could be fixed, that my parents would suddenly see how unfair they had been, that my mother would reach across the table, take my hand, and say she was sorry, that my father would admit they had made a mistake and promise to make it right. I knew it was foolish. I knew deep down that the apology I wanted would never come. But the little girl inside me, the one who had spent her whole life trying to earn her parents' love, was not ready to let go. Evan leaned close to me, his voice low enough that only I could hear. You have spent your whole life protecting people who never protected you, he said quietly. When does it end, Hayley? When do you finally choose yourself? His words settled into my chest like stones dropping into still water. I thought about all the times I had chosen peace over justice, all the times I had swallowed my anger buried, my hurt smiled through the pain because making a scene would only make things worse. I thought about the loans I had taken out so Lily could be debt-free, the car I had saved for while she received one as a gift, the promotion I had celebrated alone because my mother could not be bothered to listen. I thought about the years of quiet sacrifice, the silent support I had given this family without ever asking for recognition. And I wondered if any of it had ever mattered at all. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced down at the screen and saw a message from Grandma Ruth. How is the dinner going, sweetheart? I've been worried about you all day. Call me if you need me. My grandmother, the only person in my family who had ever truly seen me. Before leaving for my parents' house tonight, I had sent her a simple text. Dinner at Mom's tonight. Wish me luck. She had responded with a heart and a promise to be available if I needed to talk. She knew. She had always known how my parents treated me, even if she never said it directly. She was my mother's a mother, and criticizing her own daughter was not something she did lightly. But she had shown me in 1,000 small ways that she understood. She remembered my birthdays when my parents forgot. She asked about my job and actually listened to the answers. She told me she was proud of me not because I had done something extraordinary, but simply because I was trying my best. Ruth was the reason I had not completely given up on the idea of family. She was proof that love did not have to come with conditions, that someone could see me for who I really was and still choose to care. I put my phone away without responding. I would call her later. Right now, I needed to make a decision. I looked around the table, taking in each face. My mother, her expression tight with impatience, clearly wishing this whole uncomfortable scene would end so she could go back to pretending everything was fine. My father looking at me with that familiar mixture of disappointment and confusion, as if my pain was something he simply could not understand. Derek, his brow furrowed, his eyes moving between Lily and me as he tried to piece together the truth. Lily, her arms crossed, her chin lifted, radiating the confidence of someone who had always won and expected to keep winning, and Evan beside me, his hand resting on my knee, silently letting me know that whatever I decided, he would support me. I asked myself the question I had been avoiding all night. If I stayed silent now, if I walked away without saying anything, would I ever be able to respect myself again? Would I be able to look in the mirror tomorrow and recognize the woman staring back I had spent 36 years being the good daughter, the easy daughter, the daughter who never caused problems? And where had it gotten me? Sitting at a table where no one valued me, listening to my own family explain why I deserved less. Maybe Evan was right. Maybe it was time to stop protecting people who had never protected me. I took a breath and started to stand. I had decided I would leave quietly with my dignity intact and figure out the rest later. There was nothing left to say that would change their minds, and I refused to beg for scraps of affection from people who had already made their choice. But before I could take a single step, Lily's voice cut through the room. Honestly, Hayley, I do not know why you are being so dramatic, she said, rolling her eyes. It is not like you were ever going to do anything special with that money anyway. Let us be real. Even if you had the fund, you would not know how to plan a real wedding. You have always been kind of basic. The word hung in the air like a slap. Basic, as if my entire existence could be reduced to that single dismissive word. Something inside me snapped. I stopped moving. I turned to face my sister, and for the first time in 36 years, I did not hold back. I stood there facing my sister and felt something shift inside me. The familiar urge to smooth things over, to apologize, to make everyone comfortable, was still there, but it was quieter now. Buried beneath something stronger. Something that had been building for years and had finally found its voice. Lily was still smirking, waiting for me to crumble the way I always did. My parents watched with that weary, impatient expression they always wore when I showed any sign of having feelings. They expected me to back down. They expected me to swallow my pride and accept my place. They had no idea what was coming. Enough. The word came out calm and cold, cutting through the room like a blade. Everyone froze. My mother's mouth opened slightly. My father blinked. Lily's smirk faltered, replaced by confusion. They had never heard me speak like this. In 36 years, I had never once raised my voice, never once pushed back, never once refused to accept whatever scraps they decided to throw my way. But tonight was different. Tonight, something had broken, and I was done pretending it had not. You want to talk about basic, I continued, my voice steady. You want to reduce my entire life to that one word, fine. Let me tell you who I actually am, since none of you have ever bothered to ask. I took a breath, feeling Evan's steady presence beside me. He had stood up when I did, positioning himself slightly behind me, letting me take the lead, but making it clear he was there. I drew strength from his silence, from the knowledge that whatever happened next, I was not alone. I am a senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, I said. I manage investment portfolios worth more than this house. I have built a career that most people only dream of, and I did it without a single dollar of help from any of you. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw dropped. Lily stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. You never told us, my mother whispered. No, I agreed. I did not, because every time I tried to share something about my life, you changed the subject. Every time I mentioned my work, you asked about Lily. Every time I achieved something, you made it clear you did not care. So I stopped telling you. I stopped expecting you to be interested in who I really am. The silence in the room was absolute. For the first time in my life, I had their full attention, and I was not finished. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. My hands were steady as I scrolled through the records, finding the transfers I had made over the years, the ones no one knew about, the ones I had never mentioned because I had not wanted recognition. I had just wanted to help. Let me show you something, I said, turning the screen so they could see. In 2018, I transferred $15,000 to pay for the roof repair on this house. Dad, you told everyone you took out a loan. You did not. That money came from me. My father's face drained of colour. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. In 2020, when Dad lost his job and could not afford health insurance, I paid $8,000 to keep his coverage active. Mum, you told me the company offered a severance package that covered it. That was a lie. I covered it. My mother pressed her hand to her chest, her eyes wide with shock. In 2021, Mum, you asked me for a loan, $5,000. You said you would pay it back when things got better. You never did. I never asked because I knew you would not. She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. And in 2018, I continued, turning to face Lily directly. When you maxed out your credit cards and were drowning in $12,000 of debt, who do you think paid that off? You thought it just disappeared. You thought the bank made some kind of mistake? It was not a mistake. Somebody say it. It was me. Lily's face had gone white. She stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not defiance, fear. I have been supporting this family for years, Joe. I said, my voice quiet but firm. In silence, without recognition, without thanks, because I loved you, and I thought that was what family did. I thought if I just kept giving, kept sacrificing, kept being the responsible one, eventually you would see me. Eventually you would appreciate me. Eventually you would love me the way I loved you. I paused, letting the words sink in. I was wrong. The room was completely still. My parents sat frozen, their faces masks of shock and shame. Derek stared at Lily with an expression of dawning horror, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Lily herself seemed to have shrunk, her earlier confidence completely gone. And then Evan spoke. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but there was steel beneath it. "There is one more thing," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I watched as he scrolled through his messages, finding something he had saved. Something he had been holding onto, waiting for the right moment. He walked over to Derek and held out the phone. "You should see this," he said. Derek took the phone. His brow furrowed with confusion. I watched his face as he read whatever was on the screen. First confusion, then disbelief, then something darker, something that looked like betrayal. He looked up at Lily, and when he spoke, his voice was cold. "What is this?" Lily's eyes darted to the phone, and I saw the moment she recognized what Derek was looking at. The color drained from her face completely. I watched my sister's expression shift from confusion to recognition to pure, undisguised panic. Whatever was on that phone, she knew exactly what it was, and she knew she could not explain it away. Derek held the phone in his hand, his eyes scanning the screen. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, could feel the tension radiating from everyone around me. No one moved. No one spoke. We all just waited. Finally, Derek looked up. His voice was flat, emotionless, but I could see the storm building behind his eyes. "Read it out loud," he said to Evan. "I want everyone to hear this." Evan nodded and took the phone back. He cleared his throat and began to read. "Hey, Evan, between us, Haley does not really care about weddings. Maybe you could help fund mine instead. She will not even notice. She is used to giving things up for me." He paused, then added, "She ended the message with a winking face." The words hung in the air like poison. I felt them settle into my chest, cold and heavy. My own sister had reached out to my fiancé behind my back and asked him to pay for her wedding. She had assumed I would not notice. She had assumed I would just accept it the way I had accepted everything else, because that was who I was to her. Someone who existed to give things up. Someone who did not matter enough to consider. Evan looked at me, his expression soft with concern. "She sent this 2 months ago, right after we got engaged," he explained. "I did not show you because I did not want to hurt you, but I kept it, just in case." I nodded slowly, unable to speak. I was not surprised. That was the worst part. After everything I had learned tonight, after everything I had remembered, this felt almost inevitable. Of course Lily had done this. Of course she had tried to take from me even before my parents had made their decision. She had been doing it my whole life. Why would she stop now? Derek set the phone down on the table and stood up slowly. He did not look at Lily. He did not look at anyone. He just stood there for a long moment, his hands hanging at his sides, his face completely blank. Then he started walking toward the door. Lily jumped to her feet, her voice high and desperate. "Derek, wait. Let me explain. It was just a joke. I was not serious. I would never actually..." But Derek did not stop. He did not turn around. He just kept walking steady and silent until he reached the front door. He opened it, stepped outside, and closed it behind him without a word. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Lily stood frozen, staring at the closed door, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then she turned around and I saw it. The mask was gone. The sweet, innocent, helpless little sister act that she had perfected over 36 years had finally cracked, and what was underneath was something I had always suspected, but never seen so clearly. Rage. Pure, ugly, unfiltered rage. "This is your fault," she hissed, pointing at me. "You could not just let me have this one thing. You had to ruin everything." I stared at her, too stunned to respond. She was blaming me. After everything she had done, after everything that had been revealed, she was still finding a way to make me the villain. "Lily," my mother said weakly, "please let us just calm down and—" "No," Lily shouted, whirling on her. "I am done being calm. I am done pretending." She turned back to me, her eyes blazing. "You want to know why I always got more? Why Mom and Dad always chose me? Because I worked for it. I made sure they saw how much I needed them. I reminded them every single day that I was the one who deserved their attention." She was breathing hard now, her words tumbling out in a rush, as if a dam had finally broken. "While you were off being perfect and independent, I was here. I was the one calling Mum when I was sad. I was the one asking Dad for help. I was the one making them feel needed. You think they just forgot about you? No. I made sure they remembered that I was the one who mattered." She stopped, her chest heaving, and for a moment the room was completely silent. Then she seemed to realize what she had just said. The anger in her eyes flickered, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. She had gone too far. She had finally, after all these years, told the truth. And now, everyone knew exactly who she was. My mother's voice was barely a whisper. "Lily, what are you saying?" But Lily did not answer. She was staring at our father, who was looking at her with an expression I had never seen before. Doubt. For the first time in my life, my father was looking at his golden child and seeing something other than perfection. He was seeing the manipulation, the lies, the calculated cruelty that had shaped our entire family dynamic for decades. Lily must have seen it too, because she took a step back, shaking her head. "I did not mean that. Came out wrong. I was just upset. Derek left, and I—" But no one was listening anymore. My mother had buried her face in her hands. My father was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped. And Lily stood alone in the middle of the room, finally exposed for who she really was. My phone rang. The sound cut through the chaos like a knife, sharp and insistent. I pulled it out of my pocket and looked at the screen. Grandma Ruth. I answered without thinking, pressing the phone to my ear. "Sweetheart," her voice came through, warm and steady. "I heard everything. Your mother called me earlier and must have accidentally left the line open. I have been listening for the past hour." I felt my throat tighten. "Grandma." "I am so proud of you," she said softly. "I have always seen how they treated you. And I have something to tell you, something your grandfather wanted you to have." And then she said the words that made me cry for the first time that night. "Your grandfather left money with me before he passed," Grandma Ruth said softly. "He wanted me to help you girls when you truly needed it. Your parents have already given Lily more than her share from their own savings over the years. But this $50,000, sweetheart, this is yours. For your wedding or for whatever you want. He would have wanted you to have it." I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to hold back the sob that was building in my chest. All these years I had felt so alone. I had believed that no one in my family saw me, that no one understood what I had been going through. But Grandma Ruth had seen. She had always seen. And my grandfather, who had passed away when I was in my 20s, had thought of me too. He had wanted to protect me even from beyond the grave. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Thank you for seeing me." "I have always seen you, sweetheart," she replied. "Now go back in there and finish what you started. I will be here when you need me." I hung up the phone and wiped my eyes. The tears had come, but they were not tears of defeat. They were tears of release. 36 years of pain, of silence, of feeling invisible, all of it, was finally finding its way out. And for the first time, I did not feel ashamed of my own emotions. I walked back into the living room. My parents were still sitting in stunned silence. Lily had collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. The room felt different now, smaller, quieter. The power that my family had held over me for so long had finally been broken. I stood in front of them, my back straight, my voice steady. "I am not here to destroy this family," I said. "That was never what I wanted. All I ever wanted was to be seen, to be valued, to be loved the same way you loved Lily." I paused, letting the words settle. "But I understand now that I cannot make you see me. I cannot force you to value me. All I can do is stop accepting less than I deserve." My mother looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Hayley, please. We can work this out. We can—" "No," I said firmly. "You have had 36 years to work this out. You chose not to. So now I'm making a choice of my own." I took a breath. "I am cutting off all financial support. The money, I have been sending the bills. I have been paying the emergencies, I have been covering. That ends tonight. You will need to handle your own problems from now on." My father opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. "I am not leaving this family," I continued, "but I am leaving the role you assigned me. The role of the daughter who never needs anything. The daughter who always sacrifices. The daughter who exists to make your lives easier while you ignore hers. Sirs, that daughter is gone." I looked at each of them in turn. My mother pale and shaken. My father unable to meet my eyes. Lily still hiding her face, refusing to look at me. "If you want a relationship with me," I said quietly, "you will have to earn it. Like I have been trying to earn yours my entire life." Then I turned, took Evan's hand and walked out the door. The weeks that followed were difficult. My mother called 3 times in the first week alone, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to defensive explanations. I did not answer. I was not ready. I needed time to heal, time to process, time to figure out who I was, without the weight of my family's expectations pressing down on me. I heard through Grandma Ruth what happened to the others. Derek, after the scene at dinner, had demanded full financial transparency from Lily before he would even consider continuing their relationship. When she finally admitted that she had $30,000 in hidden credit card debt money she had been planning to pay off with her wedding fund, he ended the engagement. No wedding fund, no fiancé. And for the first time in her life, Lily had to face the consequences of her choices alone. My parents, without my secret financial support, quickly discovered how much I had actually been doing for them. Bills they thought were paid started coming due. The roof repair loan my father claimed to have taken out did not exist, and the bank had no record of it. Within a month, they had to sell their second car just to cover expenses they had never realised I was handling. It was not revenge. I took no pleasure in their struggles. But I also did not rush to save them. They needed to understand finally what I had been carrying for all those years. They needed to learn how to stand on their own the way they had always expected me to do. 6 months later, I married Evan in Grandma Ruth's garden. It was a small ceremony, just 40 guests, but every single person there genuinely loved us. There were no obligations, no performances, no family politics, just real connection and real joy. Grandma Ruth sat in the front row holding my hand before I walked down the aisle. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she whispered. "I am so proud." I squeezed her hand, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. My parents were there sitting quietly in the back row. We had spoken a few times in the months leading up to the wedding, short conversations that were awkward and tentative. They were trying in their own limited way to rebuild something with me. I was not sure yet what that would look like, but I had decided to give them the chance. Lily did not come. The morning of the wedding, she sent me a text message. "I am not ready yet. I hope you understand." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me was sad, part of me was relieved, but mostly I understood. Lily had a long road ahead of her and she was not ready to walk it yet. Maybe someday she would be. Maybe someday we would find our way back to each other. But that day was not today. I put my phone away and looked at Evan waiting for me at the end of the aisle. Behind him, the afternoon sun filtered through the garden trees, casting everything in warm, golden light. 40 people who truly loved me sat in white chairs, smiling, crying, ready to witness the beginning of my new life. I took a breath and began to walk. As I moved toward Evan, I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment, the years of silence, the years of sacrifice, the night when everything finally broke open, and the choice I had made to stop being invisible. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like I had to give up pieces of myself to belong. I did not feel like I had to earn love through suffering. I was just Hayley, whole, seen, enough. I reached Evan and took his hands. He smiled at me, his eyes bright with tears, and I smiled back. This is what family should feel like, I thought. Not perfect, but real. And so, Hayley's story comes to an end. But in many ways, it is not really an ending at all. It is a beginning. The beginning of a life where she no longer has to shrink herself to make others comfortable. The beginning of a family built on genuine love, rather than obligation and guilt. The beginning of finally understanding that her worth was never determined by how much she sacrificed for people who refused to see her. For 36 years, Hayley believed that being strong meant suffering in silence. She thought that if she just kept giving, kept accommodating, kept putting everyone else's needs before her own, eventually her family would recognize her value. Eventually, they would love her the way she deserved to be loved. But the truth is, some people will never see your worth no matter how much you give them. Some people are so comfortable taking that they never stop to wonder what it costs you. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop giving to people who only know how to take it. Hayley's story is about more than family drama and wedding funds. It is about the quiet pain of being overlooked. It is about the slow erosion of self-worth that happens when the people who are supposed to love you make you feel invisible. It is about the moment when you finally realize that your silence is not protecting anyone. It is only hurting you. How many of us have been in Hayley's shoes? How many of us have swallowed our pain to keep the peace? How many of us have watched someone else receive praise and recognition while our own efforts went unnoticed? How many of us have been told that we are the strong one, the responsible one, the one who does not need anything, when the truth is, we needed just as much as everyone else. We just learned to stop asking. The saddest part of Hayley's story is not that her parents chose Lily. It is that they never even realized there was a choice to make. They were so focused on the daughter who demanded attention that they forgot about the daughter who quietly held everything together. They mistook her independence for indifference. They mistook her strength for invulnerability. And by the time they realized what they had lost, it was almost too late. But here is the beautiful thing about Hayley's journey. She did not become bitter. She did not seek revenge. She did not try to destroy her family the way they had unknowingly been destroying her. Instead, she simply stopped accepting less than she deserved. She set boundaries, she spoke her truth, and she walked away from the role they had assigned her not with anger, but with dignity. That takes more courage than most people will ever understand. If Hayley's story touched something inside you, I want you to know that you are not alone. So many of us carry these invisible wounds, the scars left by families who loved us imperfectly, who saw us incompletely, who made us feel like we had to earn the love that should have been given freely. Healing from that kind of pain is not easy. It takes time. It takes support. It takes the willingness to finally put yourself first after years of putting everyone else ahead. but it is possible. Hayley proved that. And so can you. I would love to hear your thoughts on this story. Did Hayley make the right choice? Have you ever experienced something similar in your own family? What would you have done in her situation? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and sometimes just knowing that someone else understands can make all the difference. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. We share stories like this every week, stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges, stories about love and betrayal, and the complicated bonds of family stories about finding the strength to stand up for yourself when no one else will. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being part of this community. And thank you for reminding me every single day why these stories matter. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.